Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to present Mr. Nelson Velez, the chairman of our Common Ground Coalition.
It's great to be around sane and stable people. But him not included, yes, it's good. The Common Ground Coalition actually began about 9 months ago. Mr. Robert Dean was instrumental in bringing us together. And what basically we did is something that this area, and also all areas, I think, around the state and the country have been trying to do, which is to bring freedom groups back together again in unity. And in that unity, we can find leverage, we can find strength, as long as we stay in common ground principles, hence the Common Ground Coalition. We've been together 9 months, and Margaret, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's been no loss of life. There hasn't been, no, really, there hasn't been any mutilations. It's amazing. I know it's hard to believe, but we have been together, and you know, actually, there's like even groups, like Tea Party groups. I know you won't believe this, but they, even with their common ground, they'll find a way to split. So, a few months ago, Richmond, the Tea Party Federation, found out about what we were doing and called us in. And that's how I knew that this was something that has been talked about around the state, but they could not get to that tipping point. And for some reason, we have been able to do that. This is our inaugural launch, our inaugural event today. And I'm very proud to be among these people and to serve them and to continue to serve them. And I would like for them to be recognized. Everyone that's in the leadership of the Common Ground Coalition, please stand and be recognized. Believe it or not, you know, these groups sometimes start off with just 2 or 3 people, you know, in the basement. But these groups are established groups, long-standing. They're an insidious, motley crew that have been instigators for a long time. And they've been in the community and some in the state level, and they have been doing a great job. But now they've come together. And we started with 18, and now we're about 21, and we have 2 waiting to come in. And we've been doing this quietly under the radar, so I'm very proud for all the work that we've done. I want to acknowledge Robert Dean for his work in setting this event. You can stand, Robert. They won't throw anything.
Yeah, they will.
I want to see his socks. He's embarrassed for his socks.
I want to acknowledge Kelly Cook, ACT's National Field Director. Please stand, Kelly. It's going to be a very eventful night tonight, so I'd like to go ahead and not take up any more of your time, and thank you all for coming.
Oh, yes. Pledge.
King Golden, are you here? Yes, can you please lead us in the pledge and invocation?
Robert asked me to say a short invocation tonight, and Francie found some very nice words to add to a prayer that we're going to say. But I'd like to start out with the words of Edmund Burke: the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men and women to do nothing. In the last few weeks, our nation has been just devastated by violence. Events that have impacted person, families, communities, the nation, and the world. A spirit of hopelessness can easily take root in numbness to the reality that we can't make a difference. But things can change. How we can help is a question that many of us are struggling to answer. In the wake of so much human carnage and devastation, let us begin by lifting up this prayer. Heavenly Father, for those who live their lives that have not been lost in senseless violence all over this country and the world, a prayer for the families left to mourn such tragic loss of children, spouses, parents, relatives, both biological and those formed through bonds of friendship, for neighbors and neighborhoods and communities whose sense of safety and security have been forever shattered, for good people, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, atheist, agnostic, and all others who are seeking ways to make a difference, for the spirit of humanity that binds us together so that goodness, when deployed, can continue to overpower evil, for a new and brighter day when, despite our differences, we're able to see and honor you and each other. God bless Brigitte and her message that she's going to give us tonight. God bless the wonderful city of Virginia Beach, Norfolk, Chesapeake, Portsmouth, and our state of Virginia, our nation, and the wonderful men and women that serve in blue, the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Coast Guardmen. In your name we pray. Amen. Amen. Please join me in the pledge of allegiance. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And I think Mr. George Mears.
Here he comes. My chair may hit that. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, she's right there.
Good evening and welcome. My name is George Mears. I'm with the Suffolk Tea Party, and we hang out with the Tidewater Tea Party Alliance. This is just one of the 21 members of the Common Ground Coalition. I have the honor to introduce Ms. Gabriel tonight. Brigitte Gabriel is one of the leading terrorism experts in the world, providing information and analysis on the rise of global Islamic terrorism. She lectures nationally and internationally about terrorism and current affairs. Her expertise is sought by businesses and world leaders. She has addressed the United Nations, the Australian Prime Minister, members of the British Parliament, House of Commons, members of the United States Congress, the Pentagon, the Joint Forces Staff College, the U.S. Special Operations Command, the U.S. Asymmetric Warfare Group, the FBI, and many others. In addition, Ms. Gabriel is a regular guest analyst on Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, and various radio stations across America. She serves on the board of directors of the Intelligence Summit. She is also the founder, president, and CEO of Act for America, the largest national grassroots organization with over 300,000 members and 1,137 chapters nationwide, including 11 countries dedicated to preserving national security and promoting Western values. She's the author of 2 New York Times bestsellers, Because They Hate and They Must Be Stopped. Ms. Gabriel is one of the top 50 most prominent speakers in America. She will be knighted in Rhodes, Greece this coming October for her international work on fighting radical Islam and standing up for Western values. She will join a long list of American knights, including the former President Ronald Reagan, Frank Sinatra, George H. Bush, and William Hurst, and others. Please help me welcome Ms. Brigitte Gabriel.
To be here with you tonight. Such an honor. And I want to thank you for taking the time to be here. I know it is a very important night on television. So I promise that I'm going to try to get us all out of here by 8:30 or 9 o'clock. So we all can be sitting in front of our TV sets. This is truly a privilege to be able to speak here in Virginia Beach. I remember when I was starting Act for America, and I was speaking at Broad Bay Republican Club, and I was saying, now that I'm talking about Act for America and about national security here locally, I want to take it nationally, and that was in 2003. To be back in Virginia Beach, with actually our headquarters in here, and have Act for America today be the largest national security organization in the United States, with 300,000 members and over 1,000 chapters nationwide, with a full-time lobbyist on Capitol Hill, including chapter in 11 countries, is really an amazing thing. So it's truly an honor to be here. On I'm going to try to cover as much information as I can in the hour that we have and leave some time for questions and answers. I'm going to start by talking about ISIS, their ideology, why they are spreading nationwide and worldwide. I'm also going to talk about the influence operation happening within our government, and this is why we are not paying attention to the threat, and President Obama is completely turning a blind eye. I'm also going to talk about the refugee population and why we need to be very concerned about refugee resettlement in the United States. So people are worried about ISIS. You see ISIS exploding worldwide. And right now when you look at the terrorist organizations operating worldwide, you hear people talk about the ideology, because right now it doesn't matter where the terrorists are operating. It doesn't matter what color their skin is. It doesn't matter what language they speak. They all come together because they share the same ideology. So when you look at the terrorist organizations around the world, whether it is the Boko Haram in Nigeria, or Al-Shabaab in Somalia, or Lashkar al-Taiba in India, or Ansar al-Sharia in Libya, or ISIS in Iraq and Syria, or Hezbollah in Lebanon, or Hamas in Gaza, and I can go on and on. What brings them together is the same ideology. So what is this ideology that people talk about but nobody really explains what it is? And in order for you to understand that, I'm going to crunch 1,400 years of history in 10 minutes and make it as exciting as possible. You see, Prophet Muhammad got his revelation from the angel Gabriel in the early 600s, that he is to be the last of the prophets. So he started preaching his message in his own city, Mecca. He was a Meccan. And he started trying to recruit his people. And he tried for 12 years and failed. He was only able to recruit his immediate family and friends. So after 12 years of trying and failing, he decided, if I go to Medina, which is the Jewish hub of Arabia at the time, the business hub of Arabia, if I go to Medina and preach to the Jews, and if they accept me, that will give me credibility in the eyes of my own people, so they will accept me as a prophet. So Muhammad, in order to make his religion more palatable to the Jews, started borrowing a lot from the Old Testament. This is why you see a lot of similarities between the Old Testament, between Judaism and Islam. Yeah, this is why Jews don't eat pigs, Muslims don't eat pigs. Jews pray a few times a day, Muslims pray a few times a day. Jews fast on Yom Kippur, Muslims fast on Yom Kippur. So Muhammad packaged his new religion and went to Medina trying to preach to the Jews so they can accept him. When they failed to accept him, and they said, no thank you, we're happy with our religion, we do not want yours, we accept you as a guest in our city, but we are happy being Jews. When they refused to accept him, that's when Muhammad turned against them, and that's when Muhammad became a military warrior. That's when Islam went from being strictly a spiritual movement into becoming a political movement cloaked in religion. And this is why the peaceful verses in the Quran about the people of the book and all that good stuff that they talk about, the Christians and the Jews, the people of the book, that was in the beginning 12 years of Islam, when Muhammad was trying to appeal to the Jews and the Christians to accept him. Once they refused to accept him, that's when the Quran turned all violent verses against the Christians and the Jews. That's when Christians and Jews became second-class citizens under Islam. Christians and Jews became dhimmi. The only way they were able to stay practicing their own religion instead of converting to Islam was by paying a jizya or a protection tax, where they had to pay their good in a monthly ceremony, where the Jew or the Christian had to kneel on his knees downtown and hand his goods to the mullah once a month. And in many areas, Jews and Christians were given receipts to wear around their necks, like a necklace, to show that they paid their protection tax. Christians were not allowed to build churches. They were not allowed to ring church bells. They were not allowed to pray publicly. Jews were not allowed to build temples. They were not allowed to blow the shofar. They were not allowed to pray publicly. And this is how Islam started to spread. Islam continued to spread out of Arabia, and as they expanded, more Christians and Jews were conquered, and they began paying the jizya and the protection tax. Islam came up with identifiable clothing for the Jews and the Christians to be identified as they walk down the street. The yellow star, which a lot of people think is a German invention, is actually an Islamic invention in the 9th century in Iraq, no less, by the second Caliph of Islam, Khalif al-Mutawakkil in Iraq, who invented the yellow star for the Jews to identify them as they walk down the street. The zonar, or the belt, which many of you men are wearing around your pants right now, that's called the zonar in Arabic, and that's what they came up with for the Christians to wear as they walk down the street to be identified. As Islam continued to spread, they went all the way to Jerusalem. But they said Christians could not pray in Jerusalem. Christians could not build churches. And that's when the Pope in Rome in 1090 told the Christians in Rome, told the Christians of Europe, how could you sit idly by watching what's happening to your brethren in the Holy Land? You have to go liberate the Christians. And that's why the Crusaders were launched. The Crusaders were not a bunch of evangelicals who woke up the next morning and decided, we want to go evangelize the world and we want to kill everybody in the process. The Crusaders were launched in order to liberate Jerusalem from the Islamic grip and the torture that the Christians were subjected to under Islam. The Crusaders went to Jerusalem. They were able to liberate Jerusalem for less than 100 years before Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, was able to take back the city, conquer Jerusalem, and kick out the Crusades. And Jerusalem remained under Islamic control until the year 1967, when the State of Israel liberated Jerusalem, where Christians, Jews, and Muslims could pray freely under the same sky. Islam continued to expand out of Arabia. They went all the way into central China. They conquered India. They conquered Spain. And as Islam expanded, they changed the names of the cities they conquered. Spain became Andalusia. Jerusalem became Al-Quds. They continued expanding. By the 1600s, Islam covered more of the earth's surface than the Roman Empire did at its peak. And as the Islamic State grew, as the Islamic Empire grew, and as they went into India, and as they went into China, any people who were not the people of the book, the Christians and the Jews, were only given one choice: convert to Islam or die. This is why Islam was responsible for the killing of 70 million Hindus in India who were beheaded and slaughtered by the sword for refusing to convert. By the 1600s, as I mentioned, Islam covered more of the earth's surface than the Roman Empire did at its peak. Between the 1600s and the 1800s, the Europeans were experiencing the European Industrial Revolution. That's when the Europeans figured out how to make products on factory lines and make them so fast and be able to sell them on the market. And that's what gave the Europeans the money and the power to be able to build a strong military and start fighting the Muslims and kicking them out and liberating Christian land. The Europeans were able to stop the Muslims at the gates of Vienna on 9/11. This is exactly why Osama bin Laden chose the date 9/11. 9/11 was not a date that they just picked out of a hat. 9/11 marked the beginning of the decline of the Islamic State or the Islamic Empire, where the European army began the defeat of the Islamic State and began pushing back against it. The Islamic State began to shrink, and as the Europeans liberated land, they kicked the Muslims all the way out of Europe. They kicked them out of China. They started liberating lands. And this is why they drove them all the way to North Africa and the Middle East. And that's why you see Islamic concentration in North Africa and the Middle East. By the 20th century, the Islamic Empire ended in 1924 in Turkey by President Ataturk. It's amazing that we're talking about this now. It goes to show you why history is so important for you to understand. By the 20th century, in 1924, the Islamic State ended by President Ataturk in Turkey. He was a secularist, He did not want to have anything to do with Islam, and this is why he made it a law. He forbid women from wearing the hijab. He forbid men from wearing beards. He made women free to work, to vote, to get a job, to get an education, and he secularized Turkey. And that was the ending of the Islamic Empire. And by the time the Islamic Caliphate ended in 1924, the Islamic Caliphate, or the Islamic State, had existed and ruled for 1,400 years across the globe and was responsible for the killing of 270 million people worldwide, mostly killed by beheading and gruesome murders like what we are seeing ISIS do now. So do you think ISIS is a new phenomenon? No. The Islamic State was basically resurrected. Between when the Islamic State ended in 1924 in Turkey, 5 years later in Egypt, a group of mullah got together and they said, how can the Islamic State end? How can Christendom win over Islam? Islam is superior to all other religion. Muslims are superior to all other people. We need to resurrect the caliphate. And they started putting their heads together and they started organizing. People in the rest of the world, in the Western world, thought the Islamic State is over. Islam will never come back. The Islamic world did not have the brain power. Nothing came out of the Islamic world between the 1600s and the 2000s. What did you see out of the Islamic world? What invention? What pattern? What creativity? Nothing. So a lot of scholars in the Western world, even into the 1940s and 1950s, thought Islam is over. The Islamic empire will never be resurrected. Islam is on the decline. But those group of mullahs who started in Egypt in 1928, called Al-Jama'ah al-Islamiyya, or the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Ikhwan al-Muslimin, decided we're going to continue growing Islam. And the Muslim Brotherhood was launched in 1928. And as the West slept, the Muslim Brotherhood grew to have 70 offshoot Islamic organizations throughout the world, including Al-Qaeda, Hamas, and now ISIS. Remember, the head of ISIS, al-Baghdadi, was the leader for the Muslim Brotherhood, was in our prison because he was the leader of the Muslim Brotherhood in 2011. Al-Baghdadi, who is the head of the Islamic State and went on to establish the Islamic State, has a PhD, has a doctorate in Islamic theology, a bachelor degree in Islamic theology, a master's degree in Islamic theology, and a PhD in Islamic theology from the University of Iraq. This is the guy that President Obama thinks he knows more about Islam than al-Baghdadi, who is the head of ISIS, the Islamic State, which, by the way, our president does not believe it is Islamic either. Because he knows more about Islam and the Islamic State than al-Baghdadi. But while a lot of people in the West thought that the Islam will never be resurrected, two things happened in the Middle East that gave the Muslims the power and the money to explode on the world stage. The number one thing that happened was the discovery of oil in the Middle East, which we discovered, and we were stupid enough to allow them to nationalize it. That gave the Islamists the money to spread their radical Wahhabi ideology worldwide. And by the way, when we talk about the Wahhabi ideology is nothing more than the authentic ideology, the authentic teachings of the Quran as it was practiced and taught by Prophet Muhammad himself. They just happen to be called the Wahhabis because they take after the name of Wahhab. It's like me being a Maronite Christian because I'm Lebanese. The majority of the Maronites in Lebanon were Catholic. The Pope is the head of the church. We practice Catholicism, but we are called Maronites because when the Muslims were slaughtering the Christians in Lebanon and the Christians had to hide in the caves back 1,000 years ago, our leader, our spokesperson was named Maroon, so we were named the Maronite because he was our spokesperson, and this is where the name the Maronites to Lebanon comes from. That's what the Wahhabi is to the Saudis, but they practice the same religion. So, two things happened: the discovery of oil, That gave them the money to spread their radical ideology worldwide and start building mosques and Islamic madrasas worldwide, including here in the United States. As a matter of fact, the Saudis spent over $70 billion, $70 billion by 2000, teaching and building mosques and Islamic madrasas throughout the world. The second thing that happened was Ayatollah Khomeini coming to power in 1979. That gave the Islamists the spiritual covering so they can explode worldwide. So now they have the money, they have the spiritual covering, and they exploded on the world stage in 1982. This is why in the 80s we saw such a rise of Islamic radicalism and Islamic terrorism all over the globe. So, the Muslim Brotherhood, now that they have the spiritual covering and the money, exploded worldwide. They wrote a plan in 1982, a 100-year plan for radical Islam to infiltrate and dominate the West and establish an Islamic government on earth. In the counter-terrorism circles, this plan became known as the Project. Now, when we say an Islamic government on earth, what are we referring to? The Caliphate, the establishment of the Islamic State. So in 1982, the Muslim Brotherhood, which by that time was responsible for creating 70 offshoot terrorist organizations, including Al-Qaeda and Hamas, because by that time, ISIS did not exist, wrote a plan that says, we want to infiltrate and dominate the West. It's a 100-year plan, and we want to establish an Islamic government or an Islamic caliphate on earth. In the counterterrorism circles, it became known as the Project. What makes the Project so unique is it gives tactics and proposals as to how to infiltrate the West, how to dominate the West, how to use our laws against us, how to use our open-mindedness against us. They talk about how to get democratically elected Muslims on all levels in the West, including government, NGOs, etc. They talk about how to get interns put in major offices and elected offices in the West so they can have a bird's eye view as to how policy is done on the highest level. They talk about how to infiltrate Republican parties and Democratic parties everywhere in the West so they can have a seat and a voting power at these parties when it comes to major decisions so they can impact policy. They talk about how to set up community centers in the ghettos or in the inner cities so they can begin recruiting from the inner cities in order to radicalize and spread their ideology. They talk about how to work with like-minded progressive organizations that share similar goals. This is why in America, for example, when you see CAIR, the Council on American Islamic Relations, working with the ACLU, you scratch your head and you think to yourself, what do these two people have in common? I mean, CAIR is a radical, ultra-conservative Muslim organization, and the ACLU, well, you know the ACLU, need I say more, but the ACLU is being used as the useful idiots at the hands of an Islamic organization driven with purpose and an end goal. The Muslim Brotherhood started implementing their plan in Europe in 1982. Now, when you look at Europe, like in the 80s and 90s, 2000 and today, for the last 20, 30 years, Europe is no longer Europe. Europe has become Eurabia. And that was before the influx of the refugees, the Syrian refugees into Europe that we saw this last year. Europe is no longer the Europe that you used to go visit 20 years ago because they began implementing their plan. Actually, as I'm speaking to you right now, there are 85 Sharia courts operating in Britain alone parallel to British courts. In France, there are 725 no-go zones where French police is afraid to even enter. The French right now are paying the price for turning a blind eye to their no-go zones. So why are we concerned, or why should we be concerned about what's happening in Europe? Because what's happening in Europe has already began happening here. That was the preview as what's to come. Now they are here. The same thing is happening in here. Europe right now is being boiled alive. The way I describe Europe, Europe is at stage 4 cancer. It's too late to cure yourself and heal your body when you are at stage 4. America is at stage 2 cancer. Now we still have a chance to go in and operate and save our body and save our country from the disease of radical Islamism that's now spreading. So why should we be concerned about the Muslim Brotherhood? Because they wrote the plan for the destruction of the United States in 1991. Here is the plan. This plan is titled مذكرة تفسيرية للهدف الاستراتيجي العام للجماعة في أمريكا الشمالية. You all got that? There will be a quiz.
I'll fail.
Can you repeat that?
An explanatory memorandum on the general strategic goal for the group, meaning the Muslim Brotherhood, in North America, written 5/22/1991. And I'm just going to read you one paragraph out of this Muslim Brotherhood plan. This plan is so detailed. It discusses how they're going to infiltrate America in every way, with every segment, from every area of our society. And I'm going to read you a paragraph, and that will give you an idea of what they're talking about. This paragraph says, understanding the role of the Muslim Brotherhood in North America. The process of settlement is a civilization jihadist process, means a cultural settlement process. This is important because I'm going to come back and elaborate on that when I talk about refugees. Is a civilization jihadist process with all the word means. The Ikhwan, which is the Arabic word for brothers, must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house by their hands and the hands of the believers so that it is eliminated and Allah's religion is made victorious over all other religions. End quote.
Pretty clear.
Do they mince words? No. Do they beat around the bush?
No.
No. Do they have a hidden agenda? No. We have never been faced with an enemy that is so clear, so concise, so honest, so truthful, does not play games, does not lie, does not beat around the bush, does not hide. They not only tell us what they want to do to us, they brag about it, they issue press releases about it, they do internet videos about it, and they even make a video and send it to Al Jazeera to air worldwide about how much they hate us and why they want to kill us. We have never been faced with a clear enemy like this. The problem is, we continue burying our head in the sand, pretending if we ignore the problem is going to go away on its own. For those of you who have met me and have known me and have heard me speak since 2002, when I started ACT in Virginia Beach, have heard me beat this drum over and over and over for 15 years now. Things did not get any better. Things got worse. And they are going to get worse. I hate to tell you, unless we see a major shift in our country, a major rise in our country to stop this. But the most important page about this plan is the last page. By the way, this plan was presented in the Holy Land Foundation trial, the largest terrorism trial ever in the history of the United States, where our government handed down 108 guilty verdicts to Muslim Americans and Muslim American organizations raising money in the United States and sending it overseas to support and fund terrorism. The majority of the money was raised in a $160 increment, which is the price of a suicide belt for a bomber to blow himself up. 108 guilty verdicts. How many of you have heard about that trial? Raise your hand. Very few. Biggest terrorism trial ever in the history of the United States took place in Dallas, Texas in 2007 and 2008. This plan was presented as evidence in that trial. But the most important page in this plan is the last page, because the last page lists 29 Islamic organizations set up in the United States for the sole purpose of the destruction of the United States from within. And I'm going to read you a few of them because some of them are going to be very familiar to you. Number one on the list is ISNA, the Islamic Society of North America. The Islamic Society of North America are now advisors to President Obama about Middle East policy. The president of ISNA is the one who wrote President Obama's speech, which he delivered to the Arabic world. His first famous speech, remember, that he delivered in Egypt? The president of ISNA wrote that speech. So we not only have the fox watching the hen house, we have the fox inside the White House talking policy in the ear of the president. And you wonder why we are throwing our allies under the bus and cozying up to our enemies. They are an unindicted co-conspirator, by the way. The MSA, the Muslim Student Association. The Muslim Student Association has chapters on all college campuses in the United States. They have more chapters on American college campuses than Democrats and Republicans combined. And by the way, they are powerful at Old Dominion University. Powerful, most powerful group at Old Dominion University. Actually, the head of the MSA was a black Muslim from Portsmouth, Virginia. His name is Mehdi Gray, who brags he calls himself a little country mouse from Norfolk, Virginia, from Portsmouth, Norfolk, Virginia. And he is the one who was in charge of mobilizing the Muslim Student Association nationwide. How many of you knew that? Number 8 on the list, now we understand why we're losing our universities. Number 8 on the list is NAIT, the North American Islamic Trust. The North American Islamic Trust holds the deed to over 90% of mosques in the United States. Over 90% of mosques that are now being radicalized by imams brought from NAIT, straight from the Middle East, from Islamic countries, and this is why we are seeing such a rise in homegrown terrorism, who are nurtured, who are fed, and who are trained in American mosques. And this is exactly why we are pushing to make sure that the FBI continues, or at least start again, monitoring American Islamic mosques. Number 22 on the list is IAP, Islamic Association for Palestine, which later became CARE, Council on American Islamic Relations. You see them all the time, CARE, on CNN, MSNBC. Bill O'Reilly used to have them a lot, thank God he changed. CARE calls itself as the spokesperson for the Muslim community. CARE is basically the front for Hamas in the United States. It's actually our biggest enemy, Act for America's biggest enemy, because we are fighting them head-to-head nationwide. CARE is funded to the tune of millions coming to them from the Middle East. We raise money in pennies. I always joke, we raise money in pennies. CARE raises money in gold bars. That's what we are up against. As a matter of fact, CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, has had over 350 visits to the White House under President Obama. They are invited, as well as the heads of ISNA, the MSA, NAIT, etc., all these people on this list. By the way, 29 front Islamic organizations. ISIS doesn't appear on anything. Remember, we're talking about cultural jihad. We're talking about destroying our enemy from within. We're talking about what we're seeing in Europe right now. Europe is so infiltrated that only now you're seeing lone wolf attack, whatever they're calling them, by the refugees. But Europe was conquered not because an Islamic army invaded Europe and fired cannons and bombs and bullets and they conquered Europe. Europe was conquered by the infiltration. And that's what we are starting to see in the United States. Those are the instruments. This is the influence operation happening within our own government right now. Actually, CARE and ISNA, not only they are regular guests and attending every iftar dinner at the White House and guest of honors of President Obama and consulting with President Obama about Islamophobia, CARE and ISNA and MPAC actually sat at the table and worked with President Obama and his team on taking all the language about radical Islam, Islamic terrorism, Islamic radicalism, jihad, Islamic jihadism, out of all our counter-terrorism training manual. So the enemy sat at the table writing the training manuals for our first responders and our FBI on what to do in order to watch how to be able to spot terrorist activities. And this is exactly how you end up with the Boston bombing, where the FBI missed the signs, where in San Bernardino the FBI missed the signs, where the guy Mateen in Florida and Orlando with the shooting, the FBI missed the signs. In both cases, in Boston with the marathon bombing, in that case, the Russians turned an audio cassette to our FBI by one of the Sardian brothers, Gabriel, I think, talking to his mother about jihad and carrying jihadi operations and doing jihad. The Russians turned the taping to the FBI, saying, this guy is plotting jihad, you better watch out. By the way, he was a refugee resettled in the United States with his brother. So the FBI being taught under the Obama administration that jihad is basically yoga. It's kind of like Pilates to the soul. You know, it's a way to kind of stretch yourself, become the best you can be as a person. Even though jihad, the word jihad, is mentioned in the Quran 40 times, 36 times out of 40 as a holy war against the infidels to either kill them or subjugate them. Remember that. Jihad is mentioned in the Quran 40 times, 36 times out of 40 as a holy war to either kill the infidels or subjugate them. The FBI interviewed Tamerlan and his brother, but they let them go because they thought, well, he's just talking about jihad. What's the big deal? You know, he's just talking about yoga for the soul. They let him go 6 months later. What happened? We have the marathon bombing. With Mateen, colleagues of Mateen, whom he was trying to recruit into ISIS, called the FBI and reported Mateen. And they said, this guy is radical. He's trying to recruit us into ISIS. The FBI interviewed Mateen twice in 2013 and once in 2014 and ended up closing the file because they thought his co-workers and his colleagues who telltale about him were Islamophobes. Yeah. That's why we did not follow up with him. So these guys on this list are the guys that have influenced how we are training our counterterrorism and what we are teaching in our counterterrorism training manuals. Now you see the influence operation happening within our own country. And this is why you hear everybody talking about Islamophobia, terror, the first people that scream, oh my God, the poor Muslims, they're being discriminated against. Now you know who's doing it. And now we know who's influencing our government in making the decision under President Obama, this administration, to make. It's this type of influence operation in the United States. But let's put that aside right now. Right now, I want to shift a little bit because we already know how we are being infiltrated at a cultural level. And I haven't talked about terrorism yet. Remember? I haven't even talked about ISIS carrying on terror operations. This is all the cultural attack against the United States. So how else culturally are they attacking us? This whole talk to President Obama about refugees. We need to be kind to the Muslim refugees, the poor refugees. They have nothing to do with jihad. These poor refugees, we need to resettle them in the United States because America needs to open its hearts to suffering Muslims coming from all over the world. So this refugee resettlement that I'm going to share with you how it's happening and coming into our country, right now, I'm going to show you how these organizations are supporting and cheering on the refugee resettlement. Because why? They're having a new group of basically ones who are going to carry the terror attack in America, now provided cover by these groups right here. So we are hearing a lot about refugee resettlement in the United States and why they want to settle refugees and why Obama wants to bring more refugees. With the sub story was his friends consulting him. You see, refugees in America, what decides what refugees come to America is the United Nations. The United Nations Commission on Refugee Resettlement is the one that decides what refugees come to America. They are working and under the influence with the biggest bloc of Islamic nations at the UN called the OIC, the Organization for Islamic Cooperation, which represents a bloc of all the Islamic nations at the United Nations. They decide what refugees come to the United States. This is why you are seeing a lot of Muslim refugees coming to America, not Christian refugees, but Muslim refugees. So where are these refugees coming from? They're coming from 4 countries: Somalia, Afghanistan, Iraq, and now Syria. Now, the Somalis who were resettled here, remember in Minnesota, we have the largest resettlement of Somalis? 42 of these refugees resettled in Somalia, in Minnesota, are now fighting jihad with Al-Shabaab, with the terrorists in the Middle East. The first American suicide bomber was a Somali refugee from that Somali community in Minneapolis, St. Paul. The first American suicide bomber who blew himself up and became a martyr. And came back to America to be buried here on our soil. So, once the UN decides what refugees come to America, then they turn them to the State Department. The State Department turns those refugees to 9 top major federal contractors, organizations in America, contracted to resettle these refugees. 6 out of the 9 federal contractors contracted to resettle these refugees are Christian and Jewish charities. Catholic Charities of America, the Lutheran Church, Jewish charities. So they are given a ton of money by the US Treasury, our money, to resettle the refugees. Then the State Department distributes these refugees to the 9 different major contractors. The 9 different major contractors then resettle these refugees in 109, I think. Let me see. They resettle the refugees, in 190 cities across the United States. 190 cities and towns. Once they resettle them there, those 9 major federal contractors work with subcontractors in those communities, 350 subcontractors to resettle these refugees, making billions of dollars. Those Christian charities, the 6 out of the 9 who are resettling these refugees, are not passing the bucket on Sunday morning to raise the $1 billion price tag for these refugees, and that's not counting welfare, food stamps, training to resettle them, health issues, etc. So, the 9 major contractors give it to 350 subcontractors who work in the different communities. Those 350 subcontractors make a ton of money on training and settling refugees. For every refugee, they work with 1 refugee for 6 months to resettle him or her. After the 6 months, they provide them, during those 6 months, once they settle them, then they provide them with health care, dental care, eye care, whatever, etc., all the health care. Then they provide them with housing. Then they provide them with food stamps. Then they provide them with training so they can assimilate. So they provide them with people who try to teach them English, or find jobs for them, or find companies that can work with them or help them out or whatever. It's a money-making machine for these charities. And after an employee, out of the 350 subcontractors work with 1 refugee, once after the 6 months, the time limit to settle that refugee, by the time they're done with that refugee, they begin working on the papers to bring his extended family. You see the money racket that's going on? It's a money-making machine for these organizations. Don't you think they have a vested interest in bringing as many refugees as possible? They're making a ton of money. It's a cash cow. Why would they want to stop that? So when we see the Catholic Church and when you see the Lutheran and when you see Jewish organization crying, oh, we need to help, especially the Christians. Here's the irky part. Especially Christians that tell you, we need to be our brother's keepers. We need to take care of these poor people and we need to bring them into America because we are Christians and God commanded us to take care of the poor and the needy. This is what they're playing on you while making in the back end millions of dollars were money coming from the government for them to settle these refugees. This is how they are coming. And I have not even began talking about terrorism with these refugees. ISIS already came out saying, we have embedded 4,000 ISIS operatives in the refugee community right now in Europe. And what's happening with these refugees, remember, the UN decides what refugees come to America. They're taking these refugees out of UN camps in Europe. Christians are not in the UN camps in Europe because they are being raped and tortured by the Muslims. So Christians are fleeing the refugee camps. They are going out of these camps. They are not taking any handouts from the UN or from the government. They are going, finding some Christian families and getting a job and taking care of themselves. So only the Muslims are in the UN refugee camps, and those are the Muslims that are chosen to come to the United States. That's why you see very few Christians coming to America as well. So, what else are these refugees bringing with them? These refugees are bringing with them tuberculosis, diseases. Right now, tuberculosis is exploding in America. This is the type of stuff that nobody wants to talk about. The health department is covering it up because they do not want everybody afraid. And who's got the best interest? What charities have the best interest in keeping this hush-hush? The charities that are making money from the U.S. Treasury Department who are getting paid to resettle refugees. Right now, tuberculosis is in different states in America, and I'm just going to name you a few. Colorado has 16 cases. Ohio has 11 cases. Vermont, 35 cases. Wisconsin, 117 cases of active tuberculosis. And in Wisconsin in particular, they now have so many cases where the disease is resistant to antibiotics and to treatment. And it's costing $150,000 per person who is infected with the drug-resistant tuberculosis to take care of and cure. And it takes 6 to 9 months to be able to have it under control. At the cost of the taxpayers of $150,000. Florida, 11 cases. Idaho, 7 cases. Indiana, 9 cases. Kentucky, 9 cases. North Dakota, 4 cases. What's so important about the cases in Ohio, and I'm going to highlight that right now because in Cleveland, Ohio, right now we have the Republican convention going on with thousands of people attending. The cases in Ohio, which is